Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul. I'm going to try to do this in like one pass here. Everything you know about performance engineering, performance and reliability engineering is wrong. Uh, we have done ourselves a huge disservice by relegating performance engineering to notions of quality and especially testing, right? The COE, the Center of Excellence, this construct that people created for us is a Trojan horse, maybe even a virus. I'm going to back this up. In reality, performance engineering deals with the physics of digital systems, right? Systems that we ourselves construct and constrain our business with. Testing is just a tactic, right? It's just the crap we got to do. It's just a small part of performance and reliability engineering. It's just one tool in the tool belt. But what is the goal? If I've said all these things, what's the goal of performance engineering? It's to help teams make better and good and maybe even desirable decisions, right? Aren't teams already making the best decisions they can? Well, you can just look at the number of failures in production. Everybody's got them. How about all the epic industry failures that we've seen? And not just performance, but security, right? This isn't just a performance problem, but the number of cases where systems are unavailable when they need to be, public systems, right? Unemployment, healthcare, for-profit systems, websites going down, 503s, 400s between front end and back end. And look at your own dashboards. How many times are these dashboards full of technical measurements? Ooh, great, SLOs and SLIs. And that's good, right? If you're having that conversation, fantastic. It's a basis of starting to implement error budgets and all that great stuff. But ultimately, most of the IT or technical dashboards that I see don't necessarily have business metrics associated with them. The ideal would be to have both the cause and the effect metrics on these dashboards, but they don't, right? Our team's already making good decisions. The fact is, they're doing the best they can, but it's still not good enough, right? So the biggest limitation in this, right, that actually performance engineering should be focused on is product teams. They're forced to make bad decisions about releasing and also prioritizing work due to lack of meaningful, complete, and timely feedback about these things. What else would we do though, right? We live in this world like you can't get all the things instantly. We don't have infinite compute. We don't have infinite amounts of time or infinite amounts of personnel. So what else would we do? Well, let's just run through them. One, we ship without asking the right questions, right or desirable questions. We write once and read never. We deal with issues, create retros, and then we don't bother to summarize those retros and put that on a checklist for the next immediate work we're about to do to say, have we thought about those things? Those things that were painful and we even bothered to take the notes on. We write them, we put them somewhere, we don't actually regularly use them or synthesize them. We ignore signals, signals from our systems, signals from our customers, signals from our prospects, signals from our own team. We ignore these things. We don't uh, we don't put measurement or traceability into our systems. We don't put those things in place because what? Oh, it's too hard, or we got too much work. Half the reason why you have so much work is because you don't have measurement and traceability in place. We allow these things because the wisdom of the crowd, because, well, it's been like that. So I guess it's okay to be like that. Or everybody else is doing something a certain way. So I guess it must be good enough for us. Bullshit. We silo and make it really hard, specifically in performance, for skills and knowledge about the performance and reliability space to grow in our organizations. We also don't advocate for positive outcomes of our own work. We do all this work to make sure that testing and performance engineering is in place. And we don't take the wins and put them together and say, this is what works, and these are the things that don't. And we don't do a great job of advocating that out to the broader organization, to product owners, managers, to directors, leaders, and C-levels, right? We don't seek to remove toil. Man, I need to write larger. We don't seek to remove toil and automate as much as possible. Right? Not everything can be automated, but automate as much as you can, because otherwise you're doing it again and again and again, and not necessarily reaping any long-lasting benefits of that. It's just now work that has to happen and toil that has to happen over and over again. And we don't convince our leaders to do the right things in their own best interests. So by now you can tell I'm using notes. Got a few more things to say. So all these things that we don't do well. Okay. So why is it okay for us to do these things not well? Well, the rules that are in place, if we take a page from Eliyahu Goldratt, right? We listen to books and lectures from him, like Beyond the Goal. He says something about how, well, there are rules in place that make it easy for us to live in the negative outcomes that we have right now. And in performance engineering, I think the biggest problem and the biggest rule that's in place right now is that we ignore these things by not measuring the difference specifically between the cost of the feedback, right? What it takes to actually put performance and reliability feedback in place. The difference between the cost of feedback and the impact cost of the lack of that actionable feedback. Pre and post, before and after, right? The old rules are super easy, but they don't produce desirable outcomes, right? Just, hey, it's going to take this much time to do this thing. The environments are ready. We'll do it later. And maybe we won't do it at all. That's the old rules. We don't have to advocate for this stuff because we're the ones that do it. We're the only ones that know how to do it. These are the old rules. They don't produce the desirable outcomes that we need now, which is performance mindset, and performance engineering and reliability engineering needs to be part of the mindset of the people who are building the systems, not just a separate silo over on the side. These rules are things like, how would you measure this though, right? Production incident total cost. And I'm not just talking about the lack of revenue that might have been coming through, but how about the number of people who had to respond to a SEV1 incident? How about the number of people who are doing overnight work, white knuckled, 20 people on the call, right? Just tally up some basic generalizations about how much they're likely being paid, multiplied by the number of people, multiplied by the number of hours. There you get the labor cost minimum, right? So the production incident total cost. We could also measure historical cost of failure. If we're doing this, at least in part, we would also eventually accrue a historical understanding about what this does, especially useful for systems that aren't rolled out to production yet. So it's like, well, we don't have production data for this. We don't have any SEV1 incidents. So maybe we can't, we don't know. We don't know. Good enough. Moving on to the next task, which is arguably less important. A lot of negativity from people, especially who are oftentimes tasked with an awful responsibility of doing performance engineering and testing and stuff like that, who are the very few people who can do it and do it well, have the skills and the expertise, and ultimately are the ones that kind of point out flaws and cause what? Are the people who are raising up the need to do what? Rework? Little rework? Lots of rework? Architectural rework? right? So that's what I mean by negativity. And oh, by the way, the people who have not been advocating are usually not good at not being negative in their own communication. So they call them soft skills, but they're not soft when you're on the shit end of that stick and somebody's telling you no and not giving you good reason and causing an argument about something rather than seeking a positive outcome for everybody, right? So that negativity, well, it leads to low and no good relationships in the organization, right? These are the things that fall out of the old rules working the way that they're supposed to. Oh, wow, heroics. So last minute heroics. In a way, yeah, sure, they feel bad when you have to do an overnight or when you get on call and like all of a sudden it's a fire, right? Those heroics, there's both a bad feeling that comes with that, but also a good feeling. Like, ooh, I was a hero this time. So unfortunately, that human dynamic is almost like a doggy treat. It's like you get a little exhilaration, a little rush. Maybe somebody says, good job. And now you feel like you're actually doing a good job by doing heroics. Heroics are a sign of systemic failure. When people need to step in and be heroes, that's a problem. That indicates that there's a system problem. And when people are perfectly fine with that all the time, it indicates a people problem too. Hey, by the way, the old rules also said, well, the good thing is labor can be invoiced, right? If it takes more work to do something, maybe that's a statement of work that somebody wants to try to make money on. COEs. And lack of access to production data. Oh my goodness, right? The old rules were, well, we don't get access to production because separation of concern. What does it mean to have separation of concern, or more appropriately, separation of duties, when performance engineering needs to truly understand and quantify, we'll get to that in a second, things like the cost of failure in production versus the cost of putting something in place for that. And so all these things lead up to a quote that I will use many, many times because it applies very broadly to many different places. And it's from Upton Sinclair, right? It's from his book about the meatpacking industry. And he says, it is difficult for a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And therein is the old rule system, is when we have these things in place that make it incredibly easy to live by those rules because our jobs and our salaries depend on them not understanding that this is broken. We are still having problems. We're doing all these things and we're still having problems in production. Look, problems are going to happen, but if we're not learning, that's the real problem. Things might be easy, but if they don't lead to desirable outcomes, then something has to change. So with that in mind, what needs to change? Well, it's a little bit of the opposite of that statement about what rules in place, ignoring by not measuring. Well, the opposite, the new rule, is to always quantify the cost of failure in production. If you don't have some kind of production or way to quantify that, right? There are plenty of decent ways to predict the cost of failure when there is no data in production. And yes, prediction is prediction, but at least then you have something a little bit to go on so that you make less mistakes so that when you get to production, you have real data. Now, all of a sudden, you're not starting from nowhere. You're not doing nothing just because you sit back and go, there's no data, right? Bullshit. And by the way, always quantify the cost of implementing feedback to prevent those failures. Not only do you have to capture that it was a failure and capture the cost of that failure, you also have to do exactly what I said before, which was like, hey, retros, and actually think about what can we do to put something in place that prevents such an awful thing from happening. It might not prevent all the things, but that's exactly why we do some testing. That's why we think about the system. It's testable or not, right? And what can we do to improve that picture so that we can actually make sure that as we're shipping new stuff, we're not actually causing ourselves more trouble on the old stuff or the new stuff, right? So we all need to understand this thing that we're doing. We all need to understand the systems that we're deploying, the process by which we're deploying that, where we're deploying it. We also need to understand this thing about about us, right? All together, we're doing this thing together. We need to understand each other. We need to understand the processes that we use. And by the way, the reasoning, it's not enough to just say we don't do this thing. It's usually important to also say we don't do this thing because, right? There's a rule in place because it's supposed to X, Y, Z. It's supposed to prevent or it's supposed to improve or something. The traceability on your decisions matters a lot as we start to try to work together, right? Our understanding will lead to new work. It'll lead to new behaviors. It'll lead to new ways of understanding. We don't know what we don't know. But let's do that together and let's be open and be understanding about, hey, this is going to have to iterate. Our knowledge is going to have to iterate. Our process is going to have to iterate. And so for performance engineering, this represents things like the total cost of production failure, the cost of prevention, implementation of maybe some testing or some process or what can we do. And by the way, the cost of changes, right? Really understanding the cost of changes, because if you see work coming down, if you could, if you even had the luxury of seeing the work coming down the pipe from the product team and seeing how much cost, right? Usually they use something like ICE or RICE or some kind of methodology to show why it was important for them to do that work, how much benefit it did, how much cost it was going to take. And you start to see big chunks of work come down the pipe, right? The cost of changes is probably going to be somewhat linear to that, right? The negative, maybe the positive, but definitely also the negative potential cost of changes. So the size of the batch of work usually also is related to the size of the risk and the responsibility and all the work that has to go in to really make sure that that's going to work properly. So we need to throw off old opacities, right? Blinders, silos, preventions from understanding. And we also need to throw out assumptions in order to work together to make better decisions. That's what it's all about, is to help product teams make better informed decisions using feedback about performance. That's our goal. So that's all I got this morning. But it's what is it, 9 o'clock my time, and I've only had half my coffee. So feel free to reach out, comment, I don't know, like or subscribe. I don't know where I'm going to put this, but definitely engage me. Let's talk about this thing.